Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 66. I've got a pair of tanks replays and a warships replay for you today, and this is one of those editions where, purely through serendipity, there is quite a notable theme going through all three of them. Because how I pick these out normally is I look through the list and I see who hasn't been featured recently, and I pick them out, and then sometimes there's some kind of theme that I can tie them together with, and other times it's just a collection of replays. But this time round, no, there is very definitely a theme, quite a strong theme, one might say. But I won't tell you what it is just yet. We'll see if you can figure it out for yourselves as we go along. Although having said that, the title will probably kind of give it away. I sort of already know what the title of this one is going to be, so it's not really going to be that much of a mystery now that I come to think of it. But anyway, so we're starting off with King Trigon in the FV4202 with a Prius, and as you may have spotted, this is a slightly older replay. This is pre 1.0, 917 in fact, I believe. So things look, you know, it was still a decent looking game. It still looks okay looking back at these not that much older replays, but there's no doubting that the 1.0 graphics update and the whole update to the engine has been a pretty big success. There's a whole bunch of other things about the game that, you know, I would still like to see change, but graphically it's in a pretty good way right now. So he's being a bit cautious, despite being top tier, mainly because this thing doesn't have a lot of armour. The strength of this really is in the gun. It's not particularly well armoured, and it's not particularly mobile, although it's a lot better than it used to be. When it first came out, it was limited to, I think, 35 kph, and it basically had the gun handling of a heavy tank. It was a very, very awkward machine. And I say when it first came out, this is when it first came out as a Tier 8 Premium, of course, because way back in the olden days, this was in fact the Tier 10 British medium tank, which was a slightly odd choice for the Tier 10 British medium tank, given that this was basically an armoured demonstrator. It wasn't actually a production vehicle, it was purely a prototype. And it's still the case that we don't have the Chieftain on PC World of Tanks, even though it's been a thing in console World of Tanks for a while now. So, so far here on Redshire, it's been fairly even trading, but it's starting to get away from them. This IS-6, though, has pushed into a pretty bad position, and they're now just getting utterly mobbed, although that Bulldog just took a nasty hit in the process. The Stridswagen 74 is also not going to last too much longer. We actually had a rare instance of shells bouncing on the armour of this thing from the Stridswagen, so it's possible they had a stock gun. But in the process, a bunch of things have died here. There's still an enemy T-21. We know there's still a T-28 Prot around their base area. And meanwhile, on the other side, the last tank that was alive there, the Lerva, has just died. This is the part where things are starting to get a little bit tricky. Now, as I said, Trigon doesn't have a lot of armour, doesn't have great speed, but he does at least still have all his hit points, and he's probably going to need them. This isn't too bad, actually, and we'll see that it's not too bad once you start to see the hit points of those remaining tanks. It wasn't a complete ruffle stomp on the 890 line. A lot of his allies did do a significant amount of damage before they succumbed to the enemy team. So, although just looking at the team lists, yeah, this isn't great, it's definitely not as bad as it first may appear. And this is why him having all this health is going to be useful, and him having a pretty good gun is going to be useful. But first, look who's popped up behind them. Yeah, that thing also has a nasty gun, and actually a fairly decent amount of frontal armour. However, it's not like King Trigon is entirely without allies. He's got this AMX ELC running around helping him, who is currently providing the perfect distraction, and artillery is also doing their bit as well. So, although it looks like he might take another hit, he in fact manages to get his shot off first and does a nice over-the-shoulder shot, I guess we could call it, killing the prot and removing the threat from the rear. Still no sign of those heavies that were on the other flank. They're taking their time moving up. There is a tank destroyer left at base spotting, however, but not with a lot of health left at this point, so that might be what's partly been keeping them back. But of course there's also artillery in play. So the ELC whizzes off and finds the Burt, and is also going to go and look for the other artillery as well, the M4043, who does represent a fairly significant threat. Meanwhile, whilst Trigon has a little peek, he catches the IS-3 in a really bad spot, manages to take most of his remaining health, but not quite enough to kill him. So that's still a gun that's in play. And at this point, they also very definitely know where he is. So he's got to be a little cautious. He does have a lot of bush cover here, but there might be people sat with guns pointed now in this direction, including the enemy artillery, whom the ELC hasn't been able to find. So it's entirely possible that the M4043 has done a thing that artillery don't seem to do very often, and actually used their W key to move elsewhere on the map, which is something that their own GW Tiger P has not done. Although the Hummel has. The Hummel has paid attention. And if you had wanted to bet money on the GW Tiger P dying and then blaming the team in the chat, well, you wouldn't have lost anything. I'll put it that way. Never mind looking at the minimap, never mind paying attention to what's going on around you and actually moving as appropriate. No, obviously it's everybody else's fault, of course. So, 3 versus 5. The 5 are fairly low health, although maybe not the T-43. We don't know. And talking of the T-43, there's good timing. They pop up behind. And it's actually the ELC that gives the early warning there. And the T-43, rather than dealing with the higher threat tank, actually goes chasing off after the ELC instead. And this gives Trigon the perfect opportunity to come in, gets in a hit, artillery also gets in a hit, and now this T-43 is in serious trouble. If the T-43 had gone for Trigon, lit him up from behind, put in a few shots maybe, well, he still would have had the ELC buzzing around as well, but with the rate of fire on the ELC, Trigon, I would have said, would have been the more dangerous target. So the T-43 completely flubbed his shot and then bounced his second shot point blank into the turret. So that went about as well as could possibly be expected. Trigon lost no more health in the process and killed pretty much the highest health remaining enemy tank. So he's pushed up a bit to try and get to where he can spot the cap, but oh no, okay, hello KV4. That was a bit of a panicked snapshot, I think. The KV4 did give him a pretty perfect shot at his lower front plate, but unfortunately Trigon could not make it connect. The IS-3 also took a pot shot at him, and in doing so revealed his location, which has allowed the Hummel to take a fatal shot against him, the killing blow. This Hummel's actually been doing alright, and the artillery in this game generally was doing alright. They were helping their team. It's just the GW Tiger P then, of course, had to go and conform to stereotype by doing a silly thing and blaming everybody else for having done said silly thing. So I sped this up a bit because he spent a moment having a peek down that way to see if he can see anyone flanking, because there is still that super Pershing, and as he comes to look back on the other side, there's the KV4, and this time his shot finds its mark, and the KV4 was in a fairly bad position there. They were very unlikely to bounce at that angle, and they were in the open, there was no cover, so they were a little bit screwed. Trying to scout in a KV4 with that amount of hit points, yeah, it's never going to go well. So he moves up on the ridgeline and uses the cover of the bushes to spot the super Pershing, who is also very low health, and all that's left at this point is artillery, basically. The ELC has scouted all around the northeastern corner, so Either they have very cunningly hid themselves in a bush, or, as it turns out, they're practically to the Allied cap already. And as Trigon has 7 kills at this point, well, the ELC, I guess, could have tried to fire on the move. Maybe the Hubble was aiming at this point, or maybe they were genuinely letting him get this 8th and final kill, which he does. Who knows? Maybe it wasn't altruism on his teammates' part, maybe it was, but either way, he gets the 8th kill and the Radley-Walters medal and seals the win. So that was an ace tanker with, as I've said, Radley-Walters top gun and a high caliber medal. 3,727 damage done, showing the fairly reliable nature of this gun. Not inconsiderable amount of spotting either, nearly 1k spotting assistance. The Hummel there in second place with nearly 2k damage, and the ELC not quite so high up the list, but they did some pretty good work themselves as well. They did have some players that didn't perform quite so well, but that's part of the course, I suppose. But yeah, it all really, like the first part of that game, not really remarkable, and then at the point where most of their team died, it all became a bit more cat and mouse. So, on to the second replay. This time it is Katia, who I think we haven't featured in a while. She did send me some, I think it was either 1.0 or 1.01 replays, and there was that issue with those versions of the client where it just wouldn't play replays. Replays did not work effectively for those patches, at least for me, and I think some other people as well. It might not have been a universal thing. Still don't know the cause, but fortunately it's been fixed. So the latest version, 1.1, was it even 1.02 was affected as well? No, I think 1.02 was fine, and now we're at 1.1, and that's fine as well. So it's all good again. So I missed a couple of replays from her that I just couldn't record, essentially. But this is a bit more recent. In fact, this is very recently she submitted this one. And I thought, okay, it's about time we showed her in her beloved AT15A again, because she's one of those crazy people that likes this machine for reasons, I guess. I mean, this is a top tier game, so that certainly helps. It really does, and of course it's a limited matchmaking machine as well, which means it's never going to see tier 9s. But I do have to say, and you're seeing this a little bit right now, as much as she loves it, I don't think she's got the best crew in it at the moment. She certainly doesn't have a 6th Sense commander. She might be training a crew for something else. Her shooting also leaves a little bit to be desired. And that is going to be apparent through a lot of this replay, but it's kind of not really the point of the replay. It's going to be entertaining for reasons. In fact, much the same reasons as we saw before. So she's gotten in some hits, nothing spectacular so far, but unfortunately the M6 has decided to make a move, and her only immediate ally in the KV-2 has died. However, she does manage to get herself around in time despite bumping that pillar, and at this point, well, the M6 was able to damage her side armour, but they don't seem to know where her weak spots are, and so she finishes them off fairly easily. That is a big chunk of health she's lost already. So that might be important later on, but we'll see. The armour might hold up. This is very good matchmaking after all. That tank, by the way, the 25 TP, is it just me, or does that have one of the most weird-ass turrets that's been on any tank that's in the game for, like, a long time? It's a very odd-looking machine. Anyway, total aside. One other thing I should maybe mention, actually, is that this is one of the new maps that came with 1.1. Is it Studyanki? Something like that? I know the Z is silent. I did look it up, the pronunciation, and then I've lost it from my head already again. But it's basically, with the exception of this railway station and the village along the south, open fields, although there's a lot of dips in the terrain and such. So not a great map if there's a lot of artillery around, but if you've got a good turret armor and good gun depression, then you could do quite well. Of course, I haven't actually played this one myself yet. In the fairly limited amount of War tanks I've played since the most recent patch. I have played the other new map, Minsk, which I don't think anybody seems to like particularly, but I haven't played this one, so I don't know. This one might be horrible. Maybe people don't mind it, maybe there are hidden issues that just aren't apparent yet. who knows? It's probably just a bit early to say. So, less than 5 minutes in, almost everybody's dead already. They do still have their other top tier alive, though. The IS, the other top tier with reasonable armour, I should say. There were... there was another one, was it? The SP1C it would have been, yeah, which... Not so much with the armour, no. And between all of them, well... I don't know what the E25 was thinking, to be honest. That's very un-E25 behaviour. Normally they like to sit in a bush and just pew-pew away, rather than running in like a Mad March hare and getting executed by the remains of the enemy team. Fortunately for them, though, that wasn't such an E25 player, and so that probably... That removes one of the most dangerous enemy machines. If that had been in a more competent player's hands, this match might have turned out rather differently. So Katia moves up on the Tiger P, and of course is spotting for her allies as she does so, but she took the high ground a bit prematurely there. She bounced a whole bunch of shots from the T-67, so we also know they are down this line, but fortunately none of them actually did any damage. It was still maybe not the wisest course of action, though. She should have stayed on the low ground and popped up when she was much closer to the cap circle, and she did realise her error and actually do that. So now she's moving in on this Tiger P. Well, if they weren't firing HE, or is it the T-67 that's firing it? No, it's the T-67 that's firing HE. Yeah, they don't seem to know where to fire either, so between the HE firing T-67, who... I mean, I don't know if they've just run out of AP shells, which is possible with the T-57, or if they've just given up trying to hit weak spots or something, but yeah, they just weren't really able to do, either of them, anything to Katia's AT-15A. So the T-67's surely run away by this point, right? It's got high mobility, it's killed the M4, it's still there. It's still there, sitting in a bush, waiting for Katia to run it down. The mobility of the T-67 versus the mobility of the AT-15A, there's not really a, you know, like, it's like comparing a steamroller to a Ferrari, but for some reason the T-67 chose to sit in a bush and let Katia come to them, and it's not worked out so well for them, has it? Now, unfortunately for their team, in terms of things not working out so well, the IS went herring off towards the enemy base and ran into the Su-100 and presumably took some artillery fire as well, so they've died also. That's a bit of a blow. That would have been a useful tank to have right now because it's a fair bit more mobile, and as it is, Katia is faced with the choice of go to the enemy cap in a slow machine or stay and defend their own cap, and if both teams stay and defend their own caps, then it's a draw. It's not like World of Warships where the team with the most tickets wins. Although I'm not sure the ticket system would really work very well for World of Tanks, quite frankly. But as it is, she's taken the risk of going towards the enemy cap, but it's turned out to be the wrong call because the Su-100 is going for their cap and has just taken out her last remaining ally in the artillery. And this is one of those times where there's not really a right call. I mean, sometimes there might be, but in this case, it was one of those times when I feel like there wasn't. And really the only deciding factor is that, yeah, this is a slow machine, so maybe it would have been more sensible to sit back at base and pray that they're going to come to you. But if you do that and then they don't, there's a very real risk that you run out of time. So it might have been the slightly more sensible call, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was the right... that it would have been the right call, at least in my eyes. Now Katia's got a problem. She wasn't able to get the M44. Her shooting wasn't very good, unfortunately. But in another twist, instead of running to the cap and doubling up the rate of capture, the M44 decided to sit in a bush and try and ambush her. They probably could have won this via cap before she was able to get back in the AT-15A. And instead, that artillery player, I don't know what they were thinking. So as it is, she gets back with a comfortable 12 seconds to spare. Wiggles a bit against this SU-100 with the one shot they do manage to get off, but against her rate of fire, against her penetration, they didn't stand a chance. So another extremely messy game. And yes, that is indeed the theme of all of these replays, and it will be the theme of the next one as well. Just a total and utter and complete furball that somehow the players we're watching come out on top of. So that was another ace for Katia. One of, I don't even know how many she's had in this machine. She also got Defender, a bunch of other medals there as well. Steel Wall, High Caliber, probably something else I missed. I don't think she got one for numbers of Spartan. Spartan was the other one. And that would have been about for bouncing the SU-100, I guess. Is it Spartan medal, that one? I don't know. Anyway, doesn't matter. So, despite the support derpy shooting and despite the, in retrospect, wrong decision of trying to go to the enemy cap, it still worked out because the enemy team was even derpier. Sometimes it just works out that way. Now, for our third and final helping of hot mess, we come to warships and armor in the Missouri, with somewhat unusual matchmaking. It's not so much the amount of destroyers, although there are a fair few on each team. It's 5 per side, and that's a lot of torpedoes flying around, potentially. It's more the lack of battleships. 2 battleships per team is a very unusual sight indeed, and it means that although he is top tier, he's got very good matchmaking, and he's top tier in a very good ship, if the enemy team all focuses him, if he gets caught out in a bad position, all those hit points and all that armor, it's not going to last very long. It's not going to hold up very well if they're all making a concerted effort. However, this is not one of the more open maps, so the chances of that happening are probably not that high, at least not to start with. So we've got a lot of the team over at the A cap. And here at B, it's a pair of destroyers and himself, and he's just popped radar to help out himself and also help out this hider. And that was quite a nice initial salvo on that Izumo as well, 14k, that's not too bad. Now, unfortunately for Armor, the hider eats a face full of torps despite having their hydro going. And even more unfortunately, this is about to happen. The Minsk pops round the corner just as his radar goes down. And Armor holds his shots, waiting for a broadside perhaps. And the Minsk slams on the brakes. So Armor takes his shots. And precisely nothing happens. Every single shell misses. Welcome to battleships. I mean, you can have salvos that slam people for half of their hit points at, 24 kilometers, or you can get point-blank shots that just do nothing at all. In fact, the only damage he did against either of those destroyers was from a couple of stray secondary hits. So that's not so good. So he circles around a bit. We've got another use of the radar popping up. The Benson is still here, and there's some cruisers that are around as well. As for the sea cap, it looks like they are taking it, but there is one enemy destroyer that is causing that Akizuki some trouble, so that's not entirely uncontested. In fact, that's Akizuki versus Akizuki, so they've both got very good guns. And it really does come down to, I suppose, player skill and a bit of RNG, but with destroyer guns it's much less of a factor, especially with the ranges that you tend to be fighting at in destroyers. So Armor pushes in behind this Benson, who doesn't appear to be using camo. It's not really a good move in a destroyer, unless I'm just not seeing that it's a very... I don't know, it could be one of those camos that it's hard to see at a distance that they're using camo, but it kind of looks like that's a bare Benson. So that usually doesn't bode well for them being a great player either, if they don't at least have the camo, the extremely cheap credit bought camo that gives you the reduction in range at which you can be spotted, because just even the, was it like 3%, 5%? I forget the exact bonus. It's not a huge amount, but even that, you know, that can be enough in a destroyer to make a difference. So they've got the cap, or are getting the cap, but meanwhile the neighbouring cap at sea, they've lost the Akizuki, so the enemy Akizuki is still running around. There's an Ibuki up north. There is, what is that, a kid? I can't quite see on the preview screen, but I think that was the kid. So that's still around somewhere. And as for all of the ships south of the A cap, they're not doing so well. They've been forced back. The enemy team is just pushing forward across the cap. And so that is a really big chunk of their firepower that is stuck in a bad position where they can't really do much to advance the cause of victory. That's a really awkward way of putting it, but anyway, I sound like a propaganda poster saying that. So they've got the cap, and it's a mess. The whole thing is a giant mess. There's a couple of ships in the middle here. And yep, there we go, it is a kid, so he pops his radar, picks the kid up, who would have been spotted anyway, they're that close on the surface, and this time his guns fortunately do not troll him. The Akizuki is also ahead there, also low health, so they didn't come out exactly unscathed. The Ibuki also has torpedoes, so he's going to have to be wary about those as well. And this is the point where, yeah, he's starting to get a little bit focused. Now, it was only a double fire, and with the amount of hit points he had, maybe he was a bit premature putting it out. But the Akizuki has dropped their torps, we know that much, and we also know that they are a smoke Akizuki, so... no, actually, the Akizuki does get a reload booster regardless, doesn't it? Yes, no, I'm thinking of the non-gunboat ones. So, fortunately for him, disregard the thing about the smoke, that holds true for some Japanese destroyers, but not that Japanese destroyer. Yeah, fortunately for him, he dodges the Akizuki's next torps. Or possibly they were Ibuki torps, but I think they would have been Akizuki torps. Because if he'd taken a flooding at that point, that would have been bad. So, yeah, putting out the double fire might have seemed desirable at the time, but really it was lucky he dodged that second set of torps, otherwise he would be in a lot more trouble than he is right now. So the good news is the sea cap is now open to be taken by their team, and they're going to need it. They absolutely need the cap points. So that time, that is definitely Ibuki torps. There's nothing else left that could be dropping torps at this point, and he manages to dodge those without too much difficulty, although again they do get, you know, reasonably close. If he'd taken one of those, he still potentially would have flooded, but for much less time. The Ibuki at this point is just running to the border. If I were this Ibuki, I might even have just tried to stealth up and get away, because they're kind of playing a losing game right now. It's basically their fire RNG versus Armourama's main battery RNG. And in fact, you know, he's also got that option. He could just stop firing and stealth up. There is now just about enough distance between them, and that might even indeed be what he's thinking as he turns away here. Of course, he could also just be trying to go to the sea cap, but as the York is capping that, it is sort of unnecessary, and so although it's a bit of an awkward move in that it's taking him in the wrong direction, more distance isn't necessarily a bad idea. It's just, I think he's going the wrong way. He should be kind of heading more west rather than east at this point. He's also definitely not trying to stealth up, but neither is the Ibuki, and the Ibuki is definitely losing this fight. So, about half the points the enemy team has, not quite half, a bit over half, but it's not great. All that's basically left at this point are the ships that were over on this side in the middle. There's a Z-23 who is being chased by what looks like a Buffalo and the enemy German destroyer, so who knows how long they will last. There's a destroyer threatening the middle. The enemy team still has the Izumo left alive, and it's all not looking great. The Indianapolis is also in a fairly bad spot, although they did kill that Akizuki, which was quite good. And they've actually managed to get unspotted more towards the middle, although they're not looking very healthy right now. The Ibuki, meanwhile, finally stealthed up at the point where they had not a lot of hit points left, although they will have been able to heal some back in the meantime. And you can see this Ibuki is very much on Armor's mind. He's keeping his head on a swivel and trying to keep his rear turret available, basically. He's trying to not let his rear turret turn all the way around to the other side. So in between shots at stuff to his front, over towards the west, he's not going to keep his turrets always pointed in that direction, so that if the Ibuki pops up again, which they might they might take some opportunistic shots in between him firing at other things. Well, he's going to have a little surprise for them in the form of his rear turret. And he's definitely spotted, of course. The Ibuki's there, and even if they weren't, the stuff to the west obviously has a line of sight at this point. So it really does come down to, is this Ibuki feeling brave or not? It does rather seem, however, like the answer to that is no. Or maybe it shouldn't be, are they feeling brave, but it should be, are they feeling sensible or not? That might be the more pertinent question. So the Izumo, that's obviously a very high priority target. That, of all the remaining enemy ships, will give them the best amount of hit points, not hit points, victory points to their side if they can kill it. And they do look to be in a rather worse state than Armor does, although he has at this point used all of his radars and only has one heal remaining. So he's got a good amount of health, but he's running out of capacity to actually regain that health. I almost might have been firing HE myself in this situation at this point. It's not, I mean, it can feel a bit cheap to do so, but when you have something like a very well angled Izumo, where hitting the superstructure with AP shells is not necessarily guaranteed, yeah, HE might be the more reliable way to get some damage here. If it was longer ranges and you have more plunging fire in effect, then AP probably would be the way to go. But in this case, yeah, I think HE might have been a little better. As it is, though, the Z-23 pops up and gives him something much better to shoot at. The York, meanwhile, has decided it's a good idea to charge across open water and try and kill Izumo with torpedoes. As you might imagine, that is not going to be a move which they will survive. There are also torps from the, is that the Megami that'll be? Yes. Going through, and, oh no, the Edinburgh rather. Of course it'll be the Edinburgh torps. There is no Megami, I'm just making up the Megami. And while the York does perish in the attempt, I think it might be them that spotted the Z-23, but anyway, never mind. And Armor himself, you know, he's having pushed forward to kill this guy. He's now put himself in a slightly dire situation too. This is not so good. So, yeah, to cover, I think, that might be the best idea right now. He can't stealth up. He's got multiple things hitting him from multiple directions. Mostly cruisers. There's still 2 destroyers left alive, so the lack of radar might also be a bit of a problem at this point. Although the Indianapolis, who lived somehow, I think I remembered. Did I say earlier that they were going to die? They didn't die, obviously. But yeah, they might have some radar left. That might be useful at this point still. But having used his last heal, though, this is it. This is the amount of hit points he has left. So we'll see. This may or may not work out. He does get the straws, though. That was quite a dangerous one. That was quite a good one to actually kill. That little thing they did where, and it did throw Armor off, where they just sat still and against the background of, well, just ocean, he actually found it obviously quite difficult to judge whether they were moving or not. I always feel like that's a bit of an excessively high-risk move, because whilst varying your speed and course can be a really good idea, if you go to a dead halt like that, the amount of time it can take you to accelerate again in basically anything other than a Royal Navy cruiser puts you at quite a disadvantage. So they're all just closing in at the moment now. It's him and this Neptune versus the remaining 4 enemy ships, with the Indianapolis having died. And the Buffalo has taken a lot of damage pushing in here, but they are now contesting the middle cap. And on points, it's tight. It's very tight. They are just about ahead, and if they get this cap, it's going to be more than enough in the 2+ minutes remaining to give them the victory. So they can't just sit back and rely on the points to win this one. They actually have to be proactive and take the risk. So Armor pushes out, catches the Buffalo broadside. There we go, gets the kill for the Kraken, but there's still something in the cap, and it's a destroyer. The other destroyer, meanwhile, the Minsk, sets him on fire, and this is... It's a tricky call, you know. If he takes the top at this point, he's probably going to die anyway, so he puts the fire out to try and conserve the few remaining hit points. But even another fire at this stage could be really quite bad. So this is the point where if you've got a survivability build on your battleship, it's quite useful. And oh dear, I didn't turn my phone off. I normally do that. Anyway, never mind. So I can't even cleanly edit that out, sadly. You'll just have to chalk it up to my high degree of professionalism. Yes. So with that series of kills, well, that one kill, they're ahead on points, but only very briefly. So Armor takes the risk, gets in the cap. Z-23 is very low health, and at this point, our old friend the Ibuki does this. I guess they were trying to make a torp drop, but that was about the worst possible way to do it. And with 41 seconds on the clock and that Ibuki massively screwing up, they've basically won. The enemy remaining destroyers, we don't even know where the Z-23 is at this stage, but the Minsk is right there. Very, very low health. Direct front. Puts torps around the corner, but Armor obviously knows that was going to come. That was kind of the obvious move. And with those out, well, there's only a couple of seconds left. He decides to just go for it anyway, see if he can get the remaining kill. But the Minsk has just zipped further around the island, so he's never going to catch him. But the points lead is enough that this is going to be a win. And it's not a super high damage win. It's going to be a very profitable win because, hey, it's a Missouri. But nonetheless, with the Kraken, the Fireproof and the Dreadnought, yeah, he took pretty much the beating you would think he was going to take given the team list at the start of this one. But again, it was just an incredible mess of a game all the way through, and I think a big part of that was that his own team's destroyers did not do well. If you look at the team list, he's at the top, 2300 and 61 base XP. The Neptune did very well, the Indianapolis did pretty well. The entire bottom of the team list, with the exception of the New Orleans, is populated by their destroyers. So, yeah, it really was down to Armor in his battleship and the team's cruisers to do the heavy lifting. Although the Nelson obviously did something as well. They managed to place 5th, so they obviously did a little bit before they died, including getting a kill. Anyway, so hopefully you have enjoyed this set of replays with a theme I don't think I've really had in one of these videos before. If you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.